Kính thưa quý vị đang theo dõi chương trình Thời sự nước của VIETFACE TV. Hôm nay chúng tôi có một vài vị khách đặc biệt tham dự trong chương trình của chúng ta liên quan đến cuộc vận động bầu cử Quốc hội Liên bang 2016 và cảm ơn quý vị đang theo dõi chương trình này. Thanks for being with us tonight on our special edition on the federal election campaign 2016, and we have our special guests in our studio of VIETFACE TV Australia today. On my left is the Honourable Chris Hayes, member for Fowler and the opposition whip. And on my right, the Honourable Jason CLARE, the Shadow Minister for Communications and member for Blaxland. Welcome you.
Thanks very much.
Well, without further ado, I just go straight into the issue today. That you were right in saying that the Australian position has dropped from the 30th to the 60th in terms of online speed. And you like to probably to improve that position. And how would you like to do that? Whereas a lot of people say we as consumers can only, afford a Holden instead of a Mercedes. And as a daily consumer of that service, how would you justify your position on that?
Well, the first point is the one you made, which is we've gone from 30th in the world 3 years ago for internet speeds down to 60th. So now in Australia, our internet speeds are slower than most of Asia, most of Europe, America, Canada, even New Zealand has faster internet speeds than us. Russia, Slovakia, Poland, the list goes on. And Australia's better than that. And we need faster internet speeds than what we have at the moment. Most people watching this program will know that because they rely on fast internet speeds to watch videos. Now, the real tragedy of this is that over the last 3 years, Malcolm Turnbull has been building what he said would be a cheaper version of the NBN using copper instead of fibre. And he said that he could do it for half the price, but he's failed. It's doubled in cost. It's gone from $29 billion to $56 billion. So there's the tragedy, slower internet and twice the cost. We've said, look, we need to think about what Australia's going to need, not just today, but in the future. And that means what you find in Japan, South Korea, you're increasingly seeing in Vietnam as well, optic fibre. That's what gives you that fast speed for download as well as for upload as well.
Okay, well, would that justify the Labor positions in terms of cost?
Yeah, here's the important thing. The amount of money that the taxpayer puts in under Labor and Liberal is exactly the same. Under Liberals, $29.5 billion, under Labor, $29.5 billion. And then there's private companies who put more money in. But the investment by the taxpayer is the same, and the internet speed and reliability of service is much, much better.
Well, probably you need to convince me and probably the viewers a little bit more at the end.
Well, I think most people watching know that fast internet speed is not just for video, it's also for work, to be able to work from home, to be able to have students get educated at home, do their homework, download big files for university or even high school, as well as healthcare. Increasingly, being able to talk to your doctor over your computer is going to become very, very important.
Oh, that would be handy. Thank you for that. To Mr. Chris Hayes, if I may, as a current member of one of the safest seats of the Labor Party in the federal parliament, you don't seem to have credible or maybe winnable opponent in this campaign here. I mean, so I can maybe congratulate you on your advanced success first.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I don't think any of us take things for granted. I've got to say, we've been out working pretty hard.
Well, if you were re-elected, I know that you've had 6 years of experience working for Fowler.
Yes.
And what would you do? What are your priorities for your constituents for this term?
Look, as most people know, my seat, like Jason, is very, very multicultural, very vibrant, very colourful, many celebrations. But regrettably, I also have very significant pockets of disadvantage. And for me, I think the priority is making sure that we actually look after people, make sure that people and their families are not falling through the cracks. So that's always going to be a constant challenge, and we've got to be vigilant on that and stay out there doing things. And because of that, and I'm sure Jason finds the same in his electorate, education and health are probably the two main things. In my electorate, 20% of my electorate is made up of Vietnamese speakers. They know that the ticket to success or otherwise in a country like Australia is a good education for their children. So educational opportunity is very, very important to them. They get Gonski, they know that Labor is committed to doing that, and that's something they really relate to. And the other thing is issues on health. 3 weeks ago, at the local bowling club up here, we had a forum with the local doctors. And they made it very clear to me, bear in mind, local doctors, very successful people, but they've said the people that their patients are by and large pensioners, families that are not rich, low to moderate incomes, and the pressures that have been put on them through the Medicare rebate freeze has put greater pressure on them to pass on costs to their consumers.
Right.
And what they've said to them, if we break that funding model, if we move away from the bulk billing, that is really going to impact on electorates like mine. So they're issues that we've got to stay focused on.
So is there any special or specific issues in Blaxland that you prioritise as your first of the list in the next term?
Well, I agree with Chris. You know, I grew up in Cabramatta, in Chris's electorate. The kids that were in my primary school at Cabramatta Public School, many of whom were refugees from Vietnam, they're now doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers,
None of
pharmacists.
them journalists.
Maybe a few. But you know what? The reason they're so successful is because their mum and dad knew that education was very important. You invest in education, help kids learn. Often, you know, the kids that were in school with me, they couldn't speak English when they were 5 or 6. Now they're fluent and have high-paid jobs. So investing in education is very important. That's one of the big differences between Labor and Liberal. Healthcare is important too. We all know lots of very well-known Vietnamese doctors in our local area. The risk is that by freezing this payment to doctors, you'll have to pay $20 to go to the doctor. Now, if you have to pay $20 to go to the doctor, most people won't go, and then they get sicker. There's other issues as well that are important. Unemployment is higher in our area than other parts of the country. Economic growth is lower than other parts of the country. We've got special challenges we need to meet there. Education is the long-term solution, but we support a tax cut for small businesses in our area. That's really going to help our small businesses. An extra investment in English language training, which is important as well. The other one, which is worth mentioning, is support for aged care services. The first Vietnamese aged care service is now going to be built in Smithfield. It's fantastic. We've all done a lot of work to help it come to fruition. The AVAX team deserve a lot of congratulations.
Thank you for that too, yes. I've been involved in that myself, so
but you know
yes,
what?
I know.
It's probably the first of many. So if Chris and I are fortunate enough to be re-elected, I know a big part of our job will be helping to make sure that we build more aged care services for the Vietnamese community.
Yep. Well, needless to say, as you both are aware that the Western Sydney is one of the main battlefields in this election campaign. And probably Labor would hold all these the existing seats that you have and hopefully win a few. And you need to win a few to win government, of course. And
a lot.
yes, there's a big gap there. So what would you evaluate your chances of, say, getting Lindsay, Reid, or even Macquarie's, or?
So these are seats in Western Sydney, but as we know, Western Sydney is very different from one part to the other. Often people from other parts of Australia think Western Sydney is just one big place. But as we know, Penrith is different to Parramatta. Campbelltown's very different to Cabramatta. We need to win 21 seats right across Australia, lots in Brisbane, lots in Northern Queensland, lots in Western Australia, and then lots in Western Sydney as well. So Lindsay in Penrith is one seat, Macarthur in Campbelltown is another. There are other seats here close to where we are in Cabramatta today that we need to win. It's going to be very, very difficult. We're the underdog in this election.
Well, 21 seats is a lot.
21 seats is a lot, you know, and we're talking about winning 21 seats of first-term government. So look, I think, but people are hurting out there. I think Malcolm Turnbull came to the Prime Ministership after knocking off Tony Abbott. People had high expectations, and I think He's failed to deliver on that. If you even look at, not that we dwell on polling, but even look at the polling that has taken place, he has considerably gone down over the last 9 months. Look, people, I think, are tired of words. They're tired of just the rhetoric out there. They want to see things being delivered. You can't make promises to people and not deliver.
Yeah, I think
you can't make promises on, for instance, we're going to give you a big business, a tax cut, but to pay for that tax cut, we're going to cut back on health and education. That just doesn't make sense to the people out here.
Well, on that note, we come to a very important issues about money, about budget. The shadow treasurer has admitted that the Labor would have more or maybe a deeper federal budget deficit before it becomes better. And that's probably the same time frame as the coalition government in 2021. Could you probably explain a little bit to our viewers here how that would be done, or simply put, can Mr. Bill shorten the bill?
Well, I haven't heard that, but...
No, that's a new one. Under both Labor and Liberal, the budget returns to balance, as you say, in 2020-2021. The big difference between Labor and Liberal is that over 10 years, the surplus is much higher under Labor than it is under Liberal. And the reason for that is simple, because some of the policies we've announced bear fruit over 10 years. So over 10 years, the changes we're making to housing affordability laws and negative gearing and capital gains mean that in 10 years' time, the surplus that of the Australian budget is much higher under the Labor Party than it would be under Liberal, which means more money to pay off debt. So you'll never hear the Liberals tell you this, but the budget will be in much stronger condition and in a much stronger position under the Labor Party through the big, brave, bold policies that we're putting in place now that don't have an immediate impact, but have a very strong impact over time.
Well, people can counterclaim that by saying, okay, the Labor government keep a big Medicare system, keep free education and all that. Where's the money come from?
Well, you've got a choice at this election. The Liberal Party want to spend a lot of money, just not on you. They want to spend $50 billion on a tax cut for multinational companies. That's $50 billion, and let me make sure I get my fingers right, $30 billion of that goes overseas. Now, instead of spending $50 billion on a tax cut for big business, we say, wouldn't it be better to spend that $50 billion on investment in our schools and investment in Medicare? And most people, when asked that question, would say, I'd rather spend $50 billion on Medicare and schools than on giving big companies a tax cut.
All right, okay, well. Turning on to another issue which are very close to the heart of the Vietnamese community in Australia, that is about the human rights and democracy in Vietnam. I mean, you have been a strong advocate, not only within the electorate, but also in the federal parliament and other forums too. Well, and would you be still a strong advocate in the Labor government in the future as in the opposition now?
Well, I think we were when I was in the Labor government before the last election. I think Labor has a good track record when it comes to human rights. By the way, human rights as an issue is within our DNA. As a matter of fact, when talking about human rights in Vietnam, don't forget next month is the 13th round of the Australian Vietnamese Human Rights Dialogue. Matter of fact, we've only just written to the government to make sure we get a number of matters on the agenda for that, including NGUYEN. His wife was only recently out here, Vuong Khan, talking about the fact that he got arrested December last year, and since then neither she or his lawyers have been able to visit him. So he hasn't gone to trial yet. So look, these are matters that we've asked to go onto the agenda for the next round of human rights. Now, A lot's been talked about in the last 12 months about the Trans-Pacific Partnership and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. Vietnam wants access to markets in Australia and in America and other places. We need to see some tangible improvements in human rights, particularly amongst our trading partners. So it won't be just what we do in opposition, it's what we do in government, and we'll stay consistent on that as an approach.
Mm-hmm. Well, another issue too that very dear to the Vietnamese community in Australia is the issue of dispute of territorial areas in the South China Sea. And as you know, it's boiling to a level that maybe other people think, okay, well, or maybe suspect maybe a hot war would blow up anytime now. However, I mean, the Labour spokesperson on defence, Senator Stephen Conroy, has agreed or maybe advocate that the Australian Armed Forces or Navy should be patrolling the area in order to keep things a little bit calm in the name of the navigation rights to probably find a peaceful solutions to all these disputes in the area. Is that what you're going to do in the government?
Well, this is a very, very important part of the world. So much of international trade and shipping passes through this area.
It's only $5 trillion a year.
There you go. I didn't realise, 5 trillion. Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is Australian trade. Australian ships sending coal or sending oil or gas or commodities to different parts of Asia rely on freedom of navigation through that part of the world. And we represent only one part of that trade, $5 trillion. And so it's important that all of the countries of that region respect the international law and the law of the sea that applies in that area. Australia doesn't take the side of one country or another in the rights that they claim to the Spratly Islands and all of the different islands in the South China Sea or in the North China Sea. But what we do say is that China and all the other countries of the region that do claim rights must settle those claims peacefully through international laws and international mechanisms. And I think that the countries of the region are big enough and old enough and mature enough to understand that is the way to settle these disagreements, because nobody wants to see what you describe as a hot war in that region. It would be very, very bad for Asia and the enormous growth that we've seen in Asia over the course of the last few decades. And it would be very bad for Australia as well.
I know you have been following this up quite closely since recent days. And of course you also have been monitoring the environmental disaster which happened along the coast of Vietnam recently. And if elected or even in opposition, would you still support people there who are the victims of all this environmental disaster and also the what they call transparency of the Vietnamese
what we're
government?
talking about here is the water contamination around the Ha Tinh province. As I understand it, or what's been reported to me, is it's likely the toxic discharge emanated from the Formosa Steel Company. By the way, the Formosa Steel Company is not a Vietnamese company, it's not even a Chinese company. It's actually owned by Taiwanese enterprise. We've actually had discussions 2 weeks ago with the representative for the Taiwanese representative in Australia, looking at what we don't want to have is companies going offshore into, in this case, into Vietnam, exploiting, one, their workforce or exploiting environmental laws. We want to see greater transparency on that. I got a letter only last week back from the Taiwanese representative in Australia that it's now been referred to their Foreign Affairs Bureau, and they are looking about the activities of their company, because this is one instance now. There was an instance with the Phong shoe factory, you'll know, that was about 4 years ago, and the labour activists being arrested there, Miss Do Thi Minh Hung. That again was a Taiwanese company, not a Vietnamese company. So we don't want to see people simply going into Vietnam because of the whether it's because of cheaper labour options or where they can exploit loopholes in environmental laws and making a discharge, polluting the environment, or in the other case, exploiting workers. We do need to see greater transparency. And by the way, that was one of the key aspects written into the draft of the TPP. Vietnam had to sign the side agreement with the United States in respect to labour rights and also respecting the environment. What we don't want to happen is, like in terms of this discharge in the Ha Tinh province, we don't want to see those who are getting the word out about this, those who are reporting on it on social media, are the ones who are being arrested and detained. And at this stage, there doesn't seem to be any conclusive outcome in terms of those who have actually polluted the environment and caused the fishermen and their families to lose their livelihoods.
All right, now turning back to the campaign, that you might recall that when Mr. Malcolm Turnbull took over as Australian Prime Minister in September last year, his personal rating and that of the coalition has been very high at that time. Even a number of people would say that, yeah, he would, if he organised an election at that time, it would be unlosable. But the recent polls have shown us that, you know, that it's neck and neck now between the Labor and the coalition. And that probably it's very encouraging for you, I guess.
It's a tight race.
Yes, and why is that so? And can Mr. Turnbull, again I'm using this pun word, can Mr. Turnbull turn the ball?
Well, I think all Australia is disappointed in Malcolm Turnbull. I'm disappointed as well. I thought Malcolm Turnbull would be better than he's been. And I think part of that is because he's beholden to the right-wing extremists in the Liberal Party. He made a deal. He sold out his values in order to get the Prime Ministership. And there are very conservative people.
He was once considered to join Labor.
Well, that's right. And all of those things that we thought Malcolm Turnbull stood for, like a republic and action on climate change, so many other issues where he was seen as middle of the road. Now he's decided to take the position of Tony Abbott and the Conservatives in the Liberal Party that have said, look, we'll support you, but only if you take our policies. And so I think that's why people are disappointed with him. He's not the Malcolm Turnbull of old. It's like if you buy a ticket to watch a concert of one of your favourite singers from years ago, and they come out to Australia and then they sing all the songs off the new album and none of the classic hits. It's a bit like that with Malcolm Turnbull.
I went to one of those concerts.
There you go, you know what I'm talking about. People are disappointed because Malcolm Turnbull is in the lodge, but he's got Tony Abbott's policies.
Yes.
Do you have any idea on that?
Look, I think Jason's nailed it. That's the expectation of Malcolm Turnbull was very, very high. And I think he's failed to deliver on it. And I think people have seen it. As we said earlier, you can talk and talk and talk, but unless you can deliver, and that's what he's failed to do. The other thing too, I think what Bill Shorten and our Labor team's been able to show is what we can do when you're a unified group. Look, you can't paint it any other way, but they're not unified. You've only got to peel back a bit of that thin veneer to see what's going on underneath the surface there in the Liberal Party at the moment. And I think we've shown that for the term of this, for this period, we have been the most unified that I've ever seen since I've been in Parliament over the last 11 years.
Well, for the remaining time of this segment today, I'd just like to ask you and then Chris after that, is there any message that you want to send to the VIETFACE TV viewers on this election campaign?
Well, first I'd just like to say thank you. It's been a privilege to represent the people of southwest Sydney for 8 years now. It seems like it's been, it's gone in an instant. But it's a special privilege when you get to represent the area where you grew up and where you had your first job and went to school and where your parents and your family and friends live. And I feel a very special bond to the Vietnamese community, not just because I grew up in Cabramatta or because my grandfather fought in the Vietnam War, but also now through marriage and through being married to Louise, I feel like I'm married to the community. So I take with that an extra special responsibility to make sure in the work that I do my best to look after the needs and concerns of the Vietnamese community. It just so happens that many of the issues the Vietnamese community have are the concerns that everyone has. Good jobs, good education and good access to healthcare.
Well, as with Jason Clare, Chris Hayes, one of the household names within the Vietnamese community. And is there any message from you to the Vietnamese community during this election campaign?
Well, I've now been in Parliament for 11 years, but I've only been in this seat in Fowler for 6 years. Matter of fact, before I came here, I didn't know a single Vietnamese person. The Vietnamese in my community have been very, very kind to me, very patient while I've learnt, and they have made sure that I understood what was important for them. One of the things I keep speaking about, the Vietnamese in this country are still regarded as new immigrants. They've only been here, the furthest I gone was only 41 years ago. But if you look at what the Vietnamese people have been able to achieve in that short 41 years, I think you'll find that they have been the most productive of any group of immigrants that have ever arrived at the shores of this country. You've only got to look at their representation in the professions, in the trades, what they do throughout the community. And it is so humbling. You know, every time there's been a natural disaster that occurred in this country, the Vietnamese are the absolute first to get involved, to fundraise, to assist. And a friend of mine, or a friend of Jason of mine, Dr. Bin Lu, once told me about, when I asked him about why would this happen, you know, why are you the first to get involved? And he told me of an old Vietnamese saying that goes something like, when you eat the fruit of the tree, you have regard to the people who planted the seed. So in coming to this country, it wasn't that they were just being taken in by somewhere else other than Vietnam. They adopted this country for all that it provides. They adopted responsibility for its people, and they've just shown themselves to be first-class citizens. I am very humbled and honoured to be able to represent the vast majority of Vietnamese in the Australian Parliament.
Well, thank you for your kind words, and both of us, and thank you for spending time with us on at VIETFACE TV today, and wish you the best of luck on the 2nd of July.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.